Hey guys, welcome back. So now we're jumping back into Jed MacKay's Moon Knight, to where with this one we not only get the answers to why we haven't seen the other identities like Stephen Grant or Jake Lockley, but we also get an update to the condition of Marc Spector and also an explanation to why we've only seen Mr. Knight and Moon Knight up to this point. So with that said, let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so at this point we jump into a therapy session between Mr. Knight and Andrea Sturman, which was actually called as an emergency session. And really it's at this point where he's sharing the information that he's recently been made aware that he has a new enemy. And he goes into more detail about this, letting Dr. Sturman know that he was recently made aware of this when he was informed by Howley just before Mark destroyed this dude's mind, with Howley previously mentioning that he was sent by someone who had the intention of using Howley to break him. But just with Dr. Sturman hearing this, she believes that Mark had called her in for this emergency session because he thinks that she's the mysterious enemy. But when she asks Mark, like, is that what he believes? He lets her know, on the contrary, that he believes that the mysterious enemy is himself. But then sometime after the session, we then see that he's confronted by Reese, who really just storms right in the room and asks Mark why didn't he kill her, Ted, Shannon, and Ben the night when he stopped that van, when he killed their kidnappers, but spared them. Which for Mark at the time was because those vampires were kidnappers and murderers. But with them getting to the bottom of what she's upset about, it's because the night before someone had tried to kill Ted, and when this happened they left a number of crescents in Ted's back and his arm. And right away Mark makes it clear like he didn't do this. Because for him, even though he may resort to violence and beating people senseless from time to time, and yes, she has seen him kill vampires firsthand, but the violence that he resorts to is only part of his methods, of which collectively he uses to protect the people of the Midnight Mission. But in those moments when he does resort to violence, like the vampires that she had seen him kill when he initially saved her and the others, but on that night he chose violence because his methods are a case-by-case kind of thing, and he makes that determination off of what a person does and not what a person is. But all in all, he commends Reese for even coming to him with this, because if it was him, then she just would have been next up. But also with her informing him that someone's out there trying to kill his people, with him knowing now, he immediately heads out to try to figure out who's actually doing this. And while he's out, he just has Terry, Soldier, and the others lock themselves inside the Midnight Mission. But for Mark, it doesn't take long for the person that he's out looking for to pop up and find him, who by the way kinda tells Mark who he is without saying a word, with us knowing that this is the left fist of Khonshu. Though I'm sure Mark would have just appreciated just a verbal introduction. But like we've seen before, this is Dr. Bader, who also identifies as Hunter's Moon, which is the name that he tells Mark when he asks this guy like, who are you? Because as far as Mark has been aware, he's the only active fist of Khonshu. But Hunter's Moon lets him know like, even a man has two fists, and it's extremely arrogant for Mark to believe that their god Khonshu would only have one. But also right away with Mark meeting Dr. Bader as Hunter's Moon and him approaching Mark this aggressively, and right away it has Mark thinking like, okay, this is the guy who sent Howley, like this is the guy who wants to quote unquote break me. And when Mark asks him like if that's what he wants and if that's why he sent Howley, and Dr. Bader just has the slightest clue of what he's talking about. But when Mark mentions what happened to Ted, who had been attacked with all the crescents sticking out of him, and right away Dr. Bader's like, oh yeah, that was me. But as far as his motive, like we've seen before, he makes it clear here that he believes that Mark has strayed way off of the course. And as a doctor, his intentions are to fix Mark, or in other words, setting him straight, because as a fist of Khonshu, vampires are supposed to be one of their sworn enemies. But instead of seeing it this way, Mark is doing the exact opposite, by protecting them. But on top of this, Dr. Bader also points out that the way that Mark fights, that it's almost like an animal, like it's very primitive. And on top of this, when he tells Mark that he should have the skill and the prowess of every fist to ever serve Khonshu, which is another detail that's very new as far as Moon Knight's history, because clearly for the longest time his fighting style has been very brawler-esque. And with hearing this new information, it kind of has me thinking of Black Panther in a way, though it's not like Black Panther inherits the fighting style of his ancestors, but instead it's like we're learning there's a lineage here, to where in a similar way, previous fists of Khonshu add something to the newer fist that over time makes the next one better and better. And for Mark, that clearly just has not been the case, because more or less over the years, he's been in a figuring this thing out out type of phase, and the only thing that Marc has got from Khonshu has been his resurrection and divine brain damage. And Marc, he really just more or less figures that he didn't get what this guy calls the gift of the chorus as far as the memories of Khonshu's previous fists, but Marc just figures that he didn't get it because his mind's just a bit too crowded, as if Khonshu had tried to give him all the memories at one point or another, and Marc's brain was just like, nope, sorry, we're at capacity. Which makes sense, because again, we're dealing with retroactive continuity here. And because of that, it's usually the first or most reasonable explanation that just ends up sticking as far as why we either didn't know about these things before, as well as in this case, with Marc not getting the Fist of Khonshu firmware update. But with these guys just going at it, Dr. Botter, aka Hunter's Moon, he gets the upper hand, and he lets Marc know that he's gonna do what he believes that Marc is too weak to do himself, and he's gonna remove the distractions from Marc's life, which we quickly find out means that he's heading over to the Midnight Mission to execute Order 66, and more or less just wipe these guys out. But also with this happening, it's very much like a General Zod Kal-El type thing, because Dr. Botter believes that Moon Knight is just too attached to these people, and the only way to separate Marc from this attachment, it would have to be to just eliminate them altogether, because otherwise Marc, he's just gonna cling to them as well as the Midnight Mission, because as long as they're around, Dr. Botter doesn't see the slightest chance of Marc correcting his ways, so to speak. But also, speaking of things that Dr. Botter doesn't see, is the batter right behind him as Marc literally comes back swinging and just beating the brakes off this guy, while also letting him know, like, when it comes to fighting moves, like, you can't download this. Because sure, Hunter's Moon, as the left fist of Khonshu, he has a ton of these downloaded memories from all these other previous fists, which allow him to know how to move real fancy. But Marc doesn't care about that, because everything he's learned, it's all come through experience, from what he's dished out and from what he's taken. And as far as Marc's concerned, Hunter's Moon is just a doctor dancing in borrowed shoes, because he didn't earn those skills through a lifetime of busted knuckles and broken bones. So more or less anything special about Dr. Botter, it was more or less just wrapped up in a bow and given to him. But after this, Marc then just drags this guy outside of what is essentially his temple, and he gives Dr. Botter the warning that if he decides to come after any of Marc's people again, whether they be a vampire or anything else, then he better have what it takes to stop Marc for good, or else Marc's gonna do him like Osiris and they'll never find all the pieces. But then after this, when we then jump over to Marc's next therapy session with Dr. Sturman, and it's here where she directly asks him, like, why the mask? Because out of all their sessions, or really any time that they've spoke, she's never seen him without it. And in response, he kind of turns it around like, isn't your expertise dealing with superheroes or superhumans? Because in most cases, they wear masks. Which is a valid statement, but she can tell that he's just kind of brushing off the question. But then it's here where Marc clears things up for her from his perspective, because it's here where he lets her know, like, when he wears the mask, he's not Marc Spector. And he doesn't mean that in the case of his dissociative identity disorder, because he still answers to Marc, but he lets her know that he keeps the mask on because he believes that nobody needs Marc Spector, that Marc Spector is nothing. And when he says this, like, it's really a profound moment, because like we talked about before, as far as the 5 identities, and this one being Mr. Knight, it's not so much like we have the case to where Mr. Knight just won't let Marc Spector out. Like, no, this is Marc, because this is the Marc who has taken his fractured mind and repurposed himself as the Fist of Khonshu to be the priest of the Midnight Mission. And it's here where he's more or less telling us why we haven't seen any of the other identities as well, and it's because with the whole situation with Khonshu, he believes that these 2 versions that we have been getting, they're the only ones that we've seen because they're the only ones that are needed. But even with him expressing this to Dr. Sturman and telling her that a mask, like any other, whether it's a suit or a shroud, that they're both things that a dead man wears, and it's there where he foreshadows the deeper meaning, which is also why he's gone full-time Fist of Khonshu. Because just like any individual, there's more to that person than just their duty. And we get a fuller explanation to the rest of that in just a little bit. But then it's from here where we jump over to Stewart Clark, who also goes by Rampage. And he has a bit of a history of being good with tech, but bad with business. He worked with the Punisher during Civil War, but then much later that alliance had went left when he discovered during Secret Invasion that Frank had killed his girlfriend. And at the time, Frank Castle had let him know that he was under the influence of hate monger. But even still, Frank told Stewart, regardless, he did do it, and for that reason, Frank was more or less just like, okay, do what you need to do, punish me. But that more or less panned out with Stewart getting the Jigsaw makeover. But either way, with us running into Stewart here, he's on the phone with the mysterious guy that we had seen in issue 1, who had Stewart working in his office with no AC, so for that reason, Stewart has to leave the window open, and because of that, Stewart can constantly hear the sounds of the Brooklyn festivals coming inside. But we come to find out that this mysterious figure who's brought in Stewart Clark to break Moon Knight, and with doing so, his method is to take Marc's wealth by hacking into the accounts of Stephen Grant, which is the identity of Marc that has been the actor, he's been a producer, and for Marc, that's where the M's is at. But for Stewart, with him getting access to all these accounts, he's practically given himself the ability to reduce Marc's fortune into nothing. But then for Marc, like back over at the Midnight Mission, it's here where Tigra drops in, and initially it's like oh hey Marc, how you been? It's been a while. And she's all comfortable about to pull off his mask, and it's like, whoa, what you doing? And it's like, I get it. They were on the West Coast Avengers together, they used to be together, but regardless, if you ain't seen someone in a while, you kinda gotta see where their head's at before you get to snatching their mask off. Like, you would think that's just common knowledge. And when this happens, Tigra, she gets to meet Reese, but before they can really get into much of any conversation, it's here where Marc gets a call from Stewart Clark, letting Marc know that Marc works for him now, with him having access to Marc's 7 different accounts. And just to give an example, to show Marc that he's serious, Stewart just deletes $1 million. Like, $1 million. And I'm just thinking like, man, you couldn't have just taken like $1.34, and that way I'll just confirm the transaction, like, okay, yep, this guy, he got it. But nope, Stewart makes $1 million go up in smoke, and he lets Marc know that he needs to comply and literally say, I understand, or he's just gonna keep making money disappear. And so with the way that this shakes out, Marc, he complies with Stewart's request, and he goes across town. He makes his way to the location that Stewart had told him to go to, and he takes a bunch of these guys down, for us then to find out that Stewart had sent Marc after Jigsaw, with Marc also being given the instructions to tell Jigsaw that Stewart Clark sent him. And really, that's just something that goes back to a point in time, like after the whole Punisher situation with Stewart Clark, to where later he had worked with Jigsaw, and from what I recall, Stewart was actually killed by Jigsaw when he had tried to kill Jigsaw's son. But all in all, this is Stewart using this opportunity to send Moon Knight after Jigsaw with the instructions to beat him until he weeps. But really, Marc is just playing along to buy himself some time so he can figure out where Stewart is. And quickly we find that that didn't take too long, because with Stewart making these calls and all these demands, with his window open and the sounds from the festivals just coming inside, but with a little help from a team from the Midnight Mission, which was most likely Reese, he was able to narrow down and find Stewart's location. But when he shows up here with Tigra, Stewart tries to make his threats, telling him like, Moon Knight, don't step any closer or I'ma delete more money. But this really doesn't work out for Stewart, because Marc, he's not taking orders from anyone. He's past that point with Khonshu, and he's definitely not gonna follow the orders of this guy. But even with Stewart relieving Marc of over $1 million and making threats to him about completely taking all of his money and just making it vanish, but Marc lets him know that he's not afraid of losing it all, because now he's a priest, his priority is the Midnight Mission, and as far as he's concerned, no priest has done good by just being wealthy. But then it's here where we just jump to a conversation between Marc and Tigra. And it's here where we find her inquiring about what's really going on with Marc. And really, it's here in this moment where we get the completion of Marc's answer, as far as what we've seen earlier with him talking with Dr. Sturman, to where at that moment, even though it was Marc, it still was a very Mr. Knight type of answer to tell that part of his story, as far as his reasoning for not taking off his mask. But for Marc, when Tigra asks him like what's really going on with him, and he lets her know after everything that he's done and all the people who he's hurt, as well as the people who he's cared about and hurt, and he lets her know that he's done a lot, because at one point he was carving moons into criminals' faces, to where then on top of that there was the whole Age of Khonshu thing, which not only messed up his trust with the Avengers, and a bit more than he knows at this moment, but also on top of that, when he recently found out that he has a daughter, her mother took her out of the country and told Marc not to come near them. And with saying this, he tells Tigra like the whole night, like everyone's been asking why he keeps his mask on. And it's here where he lets her know it's because he doesn't want to have to look himself in the face. And this is what I was referring to, like with the whole idea of Marc hiding behind his duty with everything that he's been doing with the Midnight Mission, because for him, turning Moon Knight into something that is solely based on protecting people, and then with that, keeping the Moon Knight identities turned on around the clock 24/7, for him, that's been a lot easier than him dealing with everything that he's done and the grief from all the people and the relationships that he's lost as a result of his own actions. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below so you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.